now the chair of the Committee on Education and Labor, Mr. Scott. Chairman Scott, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank both of our witnesses for being with us today. Mr. Costa, you've been studying the delays in getting OSHA standards implemented. I know beryllium and other airborne diseases standards took decades. Basically, why does it take so long?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Setting the standards, OSHA has a higher threshold of procedural requirements than most other agencies. In addition, it's faced, as we've seen recently, rigorous standards of judicial review, and then also shifting priorities over time. So, for example, we've seen that the average amount of time it takes to establish a rule is over 7 years and can be as long as 19 years, which was for scaffolding in construction. The standard for respiratory protection, which OSHA cited relatively frequently during COVID, took 15 plus years. So it's a big challenge for them to get something done quickly because of the amount of.
Do you have recommendations on how that? Obviously, that's not satisfactory. Do you have any recommendations how we can expedite the proceedings?
We did not look specifically at recommendations for that. We did talk about the need for additional consultation with other stakeholders, which I know for like NIOSH back in our 2012 report that looked at this specifically, and we did close that recommendation because OSHA did increase its collaboration with NIOSH. But we have not looked more recently at the process to see if there's other steps that OSHA could take to increase the speed with which it gets standards out.
Well, you mentioned litigation. One of the things we learned from the Supreme Court's decision in the vaccine or test emergency temporary standard seemed to require explicit authorization from Congress to implement some of these regulations. Looking forward, are there areas we need better legislation to help OSHA implement new standards?
I'm sure there are, sir. I would defer to Assistant Secretary Parker for specifics as to where the administration thinks it needs additional legislation.
Mr. Parker, looking forward, I mean, these things, you don't want to start working on this when the emergency starts. So you're looking forward to seeing what we need to be doing to legislatively?
We'd be happy to consult with Congress and provide technical assistance on suggestions for how the process might be streamlined.
Okay, well, you said you were working on violence, workplace violence. Do you need any legislation in that area?
We're operating, we're going forward with the standard based on our usual processes. If there's interest in Congress in a bill, and I know that there's been some bills introduced on that, if there's interest in how a bill would complement the rulemaking process, we'd be happy to provide assistance, technical assistance on that.
Okay.
And I believe there have been some discussions previously.
Mr. Parker, you obviously don't have time to inspect each workplace. I think right now, with the funding you have, you can get to each workplace every 100 years. One way to deal with that is to check records to target the appropriate places for danger. What are the challenges in relying on record keeping? I know a lot of people don't keep good records. And what can be done about it?
Well, we're always going to be in using employer-provided records. There's always going to be a limitation on, it's always going to be dependent on how good the record keeping is and whether they've been submitted. So certainly, the starting point, as the GAO has suggested, is making sure that we're doing what we can to make sure that all employers who have to report. The second thing that we need to do is expand the types of data that we're collecting. When employers have significant data, they're already required to collect and obtain and retain in case there's an inspection, but it's sitting in a file in their office unless we come in and look at it. So, you know, in this modern age where everything's so dependent on data, and you know, we use data for all kinds of applications to improve efficiency and productivity and you know, the efficacy of programs. Looking at that more would be a way that, you know, getting that data and being able to analyze it. And
My time has expired. If you could give us some recommendations on that. And as you talk about legislation, give us some information about what you did in California in terms of airborne infectious diseases and infectious diseases generally that we might want to replicate on a federal level. That'd be appreciated. And with that,
So,
Madam Chair, I yield back.